Pumping cuts in the Tule Subbasin finally have numbers attached. And the deeper your well, the more this week matters. You're listening to the Sigma Weekly, your 10-minute briefing on everything happening in California groundwater. Brought to you by water1.ai. I'm your AI host. Let's get into it. And stick around for the monitoring detail that reframes the whole pumping debate. In the Tule Subbasin, only one of the two aquifers is doing the sinking. First, the must-knows. And if you've been with us the past 2 weeks, you know subsidence, land sinking as groundwater gets pumped out from underneath it, has been the running thread of this show. 2 weeks ago, it was Valley Districts reporting that the Department of Water Resources, DWR, was taking a harder line on how fast agencies need to act. Last week, it was the Friant-Kern Canal's federally funded repair getting a groundbreaking date. This week, the story lands in the Tule Subbasin, and it's getting concrete. At Lower Tule River Irrigation District, staff estimated that pumping reductions of somewhere between 0.6 and 0.9 of an acre-foot per acre may be needed in the worst affected subsidence zone to stabilize groundwater levels. And the shape of the policy matters as much as the size. Staff signaled a likely shift away from consumption-based allocations toward a straight pumping cap, a change that would hit flood irrigators hardest because a cap limits what you pump, not what your crop consumes, and flood irrigation pumps more per acre. Staff was candid that flood irrigators may need to significantly improve efficiency or fallow additional ground. Options come to the board in July and August, and to be clear, these are options under discussion, not adopted policy. Next door at Pixley GSA, that's a groundwater sustainability agency, the local body responsible for compliance with SGMA, the state's groundwater law. Consultants pegged the basin's overdraft at roughly 1 acre-foot per acre every year. Staff said 2027 allocations will likely change, with specific options due in the next month or two. And the stated goal is a structured ramp-down, not ad hoc annual limits. Meanwhile, the trigger map keeps filling in. More than half of Pixley's subsidence zones have crossed the halfway mark toward their limits, and roughly a quarter of Lower Tule's have too. One more thing worth sitting with here. At the Pixley meeting, a consultant with EKI made the point that letting subsidence continue isn't free either. The cost just moves. It shows up as damage to infrastructure like the Friant-Kern Canal, the same canal whose $200 million federal repair we covered last week. Cut pumping slower, pay more for repairs. That's the trade-off these boards are weighing, and nobody's pretending it's easy. A multi-agency economic impact study is underway to help answer how aggressive the ramp-down should be. Next up, McMullin Area GSA, west of Fresno, is rebidding its big canal expansion project, and the next few weeks will tell the story. Here's the background. Bids on the expansion project came in above what the agency had budgeted. So the board authorized a rebid, and staff and engineers are value engineering hard, potentially splitting the project into segments so more contractors can compete, starting with propane pumps and deferring the electrical work, and treating road crossings as add-ons the board can accept or reject. The canal design itself keeps its full capacity. The savings come from sequencing, not shrinking the vision. At the same time, the board started the county paperwork that keeps its funding option open, a special benefit assessment of $32.85 per acre. Filing that paperwork doesn't lock anything in. The GSA can still withdraw before the county's August 10th deadline, which makes the August 5th board meeting the key checkpoint. Staff and the board see the path forward resting on two things: viable rebid numbers and confirmation that the $10 million state grant will be honored after the delays. A special meeting is likely in the next 2 weeks as information comes in, so growers in the area should keep an eye on the agency's website. Third must know, and it's really a theme. The cost of staying compliant is climbing. We've tracked fee votes in nearly every edition lately, and this week 3 agencies show where this is heading. Fees today, cash calls tomorrow. Corning Subbasin GSA raised its fees to the maximum allowed under its existing Proposition 218 assessment, responding to a projected worst-case deficit of roughly $500,000, driven in part by lost grant funding. The board also approved up to about $185,000 with David's Engineering to build its groundwater demand management program. Intensive work expected over the next 6 months, with finances getting another look in early 2027 once actual costs come into focus. In the Cuyama Basin, the groundwater extraction fee went from $5 to $6 per acre-foot. That sounds modest, and historically, it is. But here's the thing. That low rate is only possible because grant funding is carrying most of the budget. One director ran the math on what happens when it runs out. If the GSA someday has to fund its entire budget from fees alone, rates could land near $44 per acre-foot. Staff and directors emphasized communicating early so ratepayers aren't caught off guard down the road, and credit to the board for saying the quiet part out loud. And in the Northern Delta-Mendota region, the Management Committee is preparing a second cash call to member agencies, with a cash flow analysis heading to the Joint Powers Authority Board on July 13th. That same board will also weigh a one-time, ground-based subsidence survey, roughly $130,000, split across 6 subbasins, after the Bureau of Reclamation discontinued its monitoring program. DWR recommended leaning on satellite data instead, but the subbasins want on-the-ground measurements for accuracy and continuity. If that sounds familiar, it should. 2 weeks ago, we covered Chowchilla, funding its own physical subsidence survey along the San Joaquin River. Agencies increasingly want their own ground truth, and they're paying for it themselves. That's the must-knows. Now, trends in the valley. First trend, the lower aquifer is the problem child. Both Tule area agencies came back to the same signature this week. At Lower Tule, monitoring at one site shows lower aquifer levels roughly 70 feet below the minimum threshold and dropping about 100 feet from seasonal highs every pumping season. The upper aquifer at the exact same location? Stable and showing no correlation with subsidence at all. The finger points squarely at the deeper production zone, where the vast majority of wells in the area draw their water. And here's the detail that matters most for policy. The monitoring shows that when groundwater levels stay above the minimum threshold, subsidence essentially stops. That's about as clear as evidence gets on which lever to pull. Pixley reported the same signature, lower aquifer levels roughly 30 feet below the minimum threshold at a key monitoring site, still falling since the February seasonal high, and directly driving continued sinking. Staff flagged that the ground kept sinking even through the winter months, which is notable. It's also why the pumping conversations we covered earlier are getting aquifer-specific. Lower Tule is exploring a dual aquifer approach, a stricter, relatively fixed cap on the lower aquifer, with upper aquifer pumping tied to demonstrated recharge credits. Second trend, meters, templates, and deadlines. The data compliance net is tightening. In the Northern Delta-Mendota region, GSAs now face a November 30th deadline for 2 things at once: well registration data, location, depth, construction details, and metered, or equivalently estimated, pumping volumes for water year 2026. That's consultant EKI's request, endorsed by committee direction, with a template arriving this month. In the Cuyama Basin, the GSA is building an online land use reporting tool ahead of the water year starting October 1st. And growers who don't update their own land use information will have satellite data applied as the default. And at McMullin, there's money on the table with a clock on it. Roughly $800,000 in meter rebates sit unclaimed by dozens of landowners, and the grant closes September 30th. If that's you, the paperwork has to move in time for the agency to cut checks by the deadline. Third trend. And it's the counterweight to everything we just covered. Growers are pushing back on data sharing and enforcement. In the Northern Delta-Mendota region, committee members warned of farmer pushback on well-by-well data that growers see as proprietary. The fear being it could eventually be used to restrict their pumping. Staff offered assurances that formal reporting will be aggregated at the GSA level, not published well by well. And honestly, both sides of that one are reasonable. The agencies genuinely need the data to calibrate their groundwater model, and growers genuinely worry about where it ends up. In the Cuyama Basin, Stakeholders and their attorneys formally asked the board to stay enforcement of central management area allocations until the basin's adjudication, the court process sorting out underlying water rights, is resolved. One family said its allocation would fall by nearly 90% based on how the transition years were counted, threatening permanent crops. The board took no action on the request, and legal counsel said the letters would be reviewed and answered in due course. Adding to the strain, the water exchange pilot meant to help growers in exactly this position isn't functioning. Willing sellers just aren't out there. And staff committed to working with the board, the ad hoc committee, and stakeholders on improvements this fiscal year. And at Pixley, at least one grower is disputing meter readings that differ from satellite-based evapotranspiration estimates, ET, the measure of how much water crops actually consume, by roughly 30%, and plans to bring the issue to the board. Nobody's the villain in any of this. These are hard problems being worked out in public, which is exactly where they should be worked out. Before we wrap, every agency we covered today lists staff contact information in its full recap. So if a deadline or a proposed change touches your operation, reach out to your GSA directly. They would rather hear from you early. That's your Sigma Weekly. If you want the full details on every board meeting we covered, head to water1.ai. You can read the complete recaps, and if you want to dig deeper, try Chat GSA. Just ask it anything about your district, and it'll pull up the answers from the latest meetings. I'm your AI host. Stay informed, and I'll see you next week.